God of War's first 2 hours were made available to game journalists at Norse-themed events around the world, and with that came a bevy of impressions and information to break down and discuss. 15 minutes or so of new gameplay footage was uploaded by PlayStation, and it featured snippets from this demo to give us a taste of what the moment-to-moment gameplay looks and feels like. While it may have seemed like the press was shown a lot, Jeff Keighley was told by Santa Monica Studios that what he played only accounted for 5% of the entire game. This isn't at all surprising after it was revealed that internal playtimes were clocking in between 25 to 35 hours, and even over 40 hours for players that want to 100% the game. If this is what the first 2 hours look like, we should be in for a real treat if the game keeps the momentum going until the end. I think the main narrative thrust kicks in very late during the demo, since it appears that Kratos and Atreus are mostly focused on taking the mother's ashes to the highest peak in the realms. In the CGI trailer, Kratos talks about fulfilling a promise they made, which I think is tied to this quest. It's very telling that he doesn't know who the Norns are when they come across 3 runes that symbolize them, because we know that he later gets an important story-related artifact that is critically tied to them. It's clear that this entry will take its time to tell the story, which can only be a good thing when you think about how much there is to unravel. The clip tantalizingly cuts before Atreus can explain who they are, but if you have watched my other videos, you should already have a pretty good idea. They are the fates of the Norse universe that weave the web of fate, where each strand represents the fate of one person and is then intertwined with all the other destinies to form an overall picture. The 3 Norns were called Erd, Verdandi and Skuld. In Old Norse, their names mean what once was, what is coming into being, and what shall be. It would be easy to assume that each one deals with the past, the present and the future, but the Norse belief system had a non-linear conception of time, so that wouldn't be entirely accurate. It's more like the past, the present and necessity, and my video explaining the web of word goes into further detail if you are curious but haven't seen it already. Despite these sections being very early in the game, there was still a good variety of enemies. My notes list dragars, wolves, trolls, revenants, shadow warriors and even humans. I really want to talk about the unnerving groans that come out of some dragars, like there is a person that is trapped in the body and in acute pain. It almost makes me feel a bit sorry for them as Kratos hacks away to protect Atreus, but it personifies their tragic backstories as warriors that died but weren't picked up by the Valkyrie to go to Valhalla or sent to Helheim. I'm kind of hoping that we don't have to fight them in any deep dark caves, especially with any revenants, because those groans coupled with the strained chanting of Seder magic could make for some very terrifying moments. Optional triptychs that display pictures and runes of Norse legends will be scattered throughout the world and add another incentive to explore as much as possible. I wouldn't be surprised if there was a trophy that was linked to finding all of them. Some of these structures foretold events that were yet to pass, and there was one that Odin spied on in Jotunheim that pictured Atreus and Kratos on a boat heading towards a mountain. Because there appears to be a large number of them in this world, they may have come from practitioners of Seder magic before they became revenants. During the demo, we saw a triptych that told the story of Fenrir's sons, Skoll and Hati. They were cursed, just like the world serpents, because of Groa's vision, and according to Norse mythology, Odin put a spell on them that would pull them into the sky to chase the chariots that pulled the sun and moon, and this was to ensure that they were on schedule. However, it is said that they would break this spell when the time comes and consume the sun and moon at Ragnarok, which we see in the rightmost image. Groa saw what was described as an enormous beastly wolf rampaging across the countryside and consuming the sun. According to the prose Edda, this would be Skoll, but if you take a look at the author's source, a poem titled Grimnishmal, you could take the interpretation that it is Hati that chases the sun and Skoll that chases the moon. A lot of things in Norse mythology are very open to interpretation based on different translations, sometimes leading to conflicting views. Another poem in the Poetic Edda could be interpreted to give the role of sun chaser to Fenrir, which is where Neil Gaiman arrived at in his book on Norse mythology. I was working from this book for my analysis of the Lost Pages, which is why I came to the conclusion that the wolf consuming the sun in Groa's vision was Fenrir, the father. Fenrir was the third child of Loki and brother to the world serpent in Hel. He was also mistreated by the gods, especially because he was the one that was prophesied to kill Odin. If his son Hati was an enormous beastly wolf, I cannot wait to see what Fenrir looks like. There are some accounts that say Skoll and Hati did not spend all of their time in the sky and were free to run on the earth below if the sun and moon stuck to their times. The brothers would only be pulled back into the sky by Odin's spell if they started to appear later than usual. If the same is true for the God of War universe, it would definitely increase the chances of Kratos and Atreus crossing paths with them. I want to direct your attention to the sights below Skoll and Hati consuming the sun and moon. You can very clearly see Odin on his 8-legged horse Sleipnir, wielding the spear that could never miss called Gungnir. Thor is behind him, you can see one of Odin's ravens above, and his army the Einherjar can be seen below fighting on his behalf. The figures on the right that fight against them are a lot more ambiguous because I can't confirm who they are with confidence. The one on the far right could very well be Kratos, since he has a shield, a very round head, and what could pass for an axe. I think the figure next to him is either an older version of Atreus or Loki. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below, I'd be fascinated to read your interpretation. We got an early look at 2 other triptychs that may be featured at some point on the adventure. The first chronicles the Norse creation story when Odin and his brothers killed Ymir, the forefather to the frost giants, to make the different realms. This was why the giants had a very rocky history with the Aesir gods. The other triptych provides the backstory of the world serpent and the role that he will play at Ragnarok. The first image shows his mother Angerbotha, the giantess that Loki had an affair with. The second image features runes that represent each of the realms, and we can see Odin sitting on his throne with the Einherjar in Valhalla facing him. I think this is supposed to show that Jormungandr got so big that he could wrap himself around all of the realms, not just Scandinavia in Midgard. Calling him the World Serpent instead of the Midgard Serpent therefore makes more sense, and so would the logo, as you can see the outline of a serpent's head to the bottom right. In the third image we can see the World Serpent and Thor killing each other at Ragnarok. While the term Leviathan is mainly used for the monster in the Old Testament, it can also denote any large sea creature, which the World Serpent definitely qualifies as. Brock and Sindri made Kratos' primary weapon and dubbed it the Leviathan Axe because it was a weapon that was made to counter Thor's weapon Mjolnir, just like the World Serpent and Thor eventually cancel each other out. During a tour of the artifacts that were on display at PSX, Corey told us that Atreus' journal links the user interface in the game. You can go into the journal at any point for more insight into what Atreus knows, and maybe for a bit of narration on what he thinks of certain things, since it is said to be in his voice. This would explain why Atreus has the most lines in the game. It's also handy for collecting all the bits of lore that you discover as you play, since he opens it up when examining the triptych and when discovering a tablet that evidences a trading site between the Jotuns and the gods. The marketplace must have fallen into ruin after the connection to Jotunheim was sundered. Upon loading up the game for the first time, players will be greeted with 4 difficulty settings. Give Me a Story is the easiest mode for those that just want to play the story, Give Me a Balanced Experience is basically normal mode, and Give Me a Challenge is the hard mode. I don't know which one I'm going to choose yet, but I think I'll opt for the normal mode so that I can get through the game at a steady pace. The 4th and most challenging difficulty setting is called Give Me God of War. It has a separate save and cannot be changed once selected. Players can choose it immediately instead of having to complete the game first. According to Rolling Stone's article, Corey said that it isn't simply an algorithmic increase in difficulty. We did a ton of stuff to make it a genuine challenge, not a cynical increase. Enemies are all changed up. We changed the attack pattern of things, it's hugely different. I doubt you'll be able to earn the Platinum Trophy without completing the game on this difficulty, so I'll have to get around to it at some point, and it might even make a fun Let's Play series. Despite being a big mechanical departure from previous games, many still came away feeling like they played a God of War game. This isn't exactly unforeseen, since Corey tried to assemble as much of the original development team as possible in order to bring fresh ideas to this project, like the ones that were brought to the original during its development. We know that Kratos' axe and shield are the bread and butter of his arsenal, with Atreus and his bow providing assistance. However, there is still a lot that we are being kept in the dark on. The shield, for instance, has a name that we won't discover until we get to play the game. It may have been made using the scales of a famous dragon in Norse lore, but either way, I'm sure there is a good reason why it's being kept a secret. Even though the shield works well for parrying and blocking regular attacks, some enemies have attacks that cannot be blocked, which I think is represented by a beige indicator. The player either has the option to roll away or counter with a charged heavy attack. Santa Monica Studios avoided commenting when Game Informer asked them whether Kratos will obtain more weapons later on, but if the ESRB rating is anything to go by, it is almost guaranteed that he will. It was pointed out to me that the description has been changed to remove the words double chained blades, but this was probably done because it could be viewed as a spoiler. Despite the one-shot camera, I still fervently believe that they will return in a flashback, because there are ways of making a transition to past events or visions without having to make a cut. This does have the implication that we won't see the Norse gods until Kratos crosses them in person, since the camera can't exactly cut to Asgard to show the schemes they're concocting. I don't think this means we'll have to wait to get to Asgard to finally meet them in person, because unlike the Greek gods, they were very active in Midgard. The combat designers spoke about continuing the series staple of huge bosses and how the closer camera has made them rethink the way they present this, and the assistance that they have to provide in terms of tracking and the information you need to fight them. After seeing the gameplay, we now have a more concrete idea of the features that they have implemented in order to help players deal with enemies behind them, but I can see at least one of them being turned off for the highest difficulty setting. The first is the ability to quick turn like you could in Resident Evil 4, which also changed things up for that series when it brought the camera closer to the player. Secondly, Atreus calls out enemies when they are off screen by shouting that they are behind you or to the left or right. Then you have the small arrow indicators that tell you of the direction of enemies and projectiles behind Kratos. With a camera that is much closer and groups of enemies that are as relentless as ever, moment-to-moment decision making becomes more pressing about how best to effectively manage large crowds of enemies. This may have necessitated a slower combat system, but it looks just as brutal and fluid as before if you ask me. You can freeze enemies on impact when throwing the axe at them, which can help incapacitate one while you deal with the others, but this is where Atreus comes in, who has more range with his bow. The developers came up with two main levels of participation in battle to ensure that he does not become a liability on one end of the spectrum or steal all of the kills on the other. There are actions he performs autonomously and those that he takes on command at the press of his button on square. When fighting enemies, he will stand back and fire arrows on his own, but if you want him to focus on a particular one, you can press square while looking at it with the camera. When Atreus has his bow, you can manually order him to fire up to 3 arrows in quick succession, but this meter has a cooldown period, so you'll have to wait for it to charge again before you can fire more. On his own, he will help with dividing the battlefield by taking the attention away from the player, and the developers designed a whole new suite of attacks that he can do autonomously, like jumping on an enemy and holding them down, tripping them up, and whacking them with the end of his bow. The new gameplay footage showed that enemies now have 2 different meters this time as well. The Leviathan axe chips away at the health bar, while Atreus' arrows are more effective at filling the stun meter to keep them at bay or to serve them up for Kratos to kill with a finishing move by pressing the R3 button. Using the shield and his fists to bash enemies help fill the stun meter as well. Kratos' signature move of ripping grunts in half is back, but other finishing moves can be performed depending on the enemy type. For example, Kratos can throw them into other grunts or slam them into the ground to place the group off balance. If you are of the opinion that the meters ruin the aesthetic, you do not need to worry, as there is an option in the menu to turn them off. Sometimes it is necessary to stun enemies before taking them down, so Atreus is indispensable in certain combat situations, like the ones involving revenants. Without his arrows to stop them from teleporting, it would be nigh impossible for Kratos to hit them with his axe. There will be moments when Atreus is specifically targeted, as you can see here where a heavy variant of the Draga picks him up, but he has the capability to free himself sometimes if the player is busy. He cannot be killed in-game either, so you won't have to worry about constantly monitoring his health in combat and reaching fail states because of the AI messing up. While Atreus cannot die, it is possible for him to get knocked out for the rest of the battle if you let him get overwhelmed by too many enemies. Players will have to go over to revive him if he gets knocked down. It takes a lot more to stun larger foes like trolls and ogres, but they have precision targets on their bodies that are very sensitive to leaving them dazed for a few seconds. For the troll, it's the head, and Kratos' axe bounces off his body because he misses it. On top of his health bar, you can see a name in Old Norse which translates to Death Merchant. He is a fire troll variant, and the PSX display confirms that the toy Atreus plays with at the beginning of the 2016 demo was modelled after this monster. His health bar is split in two, which could mean that there are 2 phases to every encounter. When you get to the last half, the Death Merchant probably gets more aggressive with a different set of attacks that flip the dynamics of the encounter. A different troll by the name of Burning Death was showcased earlier this week. Each troll has its own name and their own backstory, but I think they all have something in common in that they were betrayed by the gods. The attacks will vary depending on the one that you fight, and they don't all have precision targets in the same place, requiring the player to tune their strategies accordingly. You can see Kratos throwing the axe at the head of this troll, but it doesn't stagger him. Throwing it at his arm just as he is about to throw fireballs, however, interrupts the attack. The bar underneath his health indicates that it is possible to stun these monsters despite their size. We got to see a finishing move for the troll enemy type in the E3 trailer from last year, and I wonder if Kratos will have a different one for each of them when their health gets low enough. The Kid Robot collectible miniseries contains a vinyl figure of an ice troll variant. They are called Yarnfota, which translates to Iron Father. We had only seen fire trolls before this, which I assumed was the only type of troll that Kratos and Atreus would encounter. I think the differences between the two are more than merely aesthetic and could have wider ranging implications in gameplay. It makes sense to use the Leviathan axe in its default mode against a fire troll, but what happens when the enemy that you come up against is made up of the same element? The ice-infused humanoid enemies are resistant to the strikes of the axe for this reason, and the same might be said for ice trolls. Kratos has to resort to using his fists for the former, but I'm not sure that they would be enough for the latter. As discussed in my analysis of the Lost Pages, the head of the Leviathan axe contains 2 slots for runestones that are tied to the light and heavy attack, and allow for the use of unique special moves. Runestones can be equipped that change its elemental power to something else like fire. Players also have the option to use the environment to their advantage. Game Informer wrote about blowing up fiery containers to dispatch with an ogre, for instance. I believe that Atreus can also inflict fire damage with his bow, and the fact that there is a small icon above an enemy's health bar to show whether they are affected by fire or ice hints that elements will have a bigger role to play in combat. This isn't necessarily a novel system for this series either. Those who played God of War Ascension should remember that you could change the elemental powers of the blades between fire, lightning, ice, and the souls of Hades. The weapon was the same at its core, but the elements involved and the combos changed, which added some more depth, particularly when enemies were more vulnerable to one element over others. The axe in the gameplay showcase of E3 2016 had 3 empty slots as opposed to 2, but I think that this is just an example of something that changed during development. That demo also had a feature where the forest would react to Kratos and other characters by changing colour, but it has since been cut from the game. Special attacks are linked to the runestones that you put in your weapon, and you can spot the icons associated with the light and heavy attacks in the bottom left. An example of a light runic attack is the stun blast that sort of blinds enemies, which you can also see Kratos use against an ogre in the E3 2017 trailer. Realm Shift appears to be runic magic that is tied to the heavy attack, and it reminds me of Witch Time from Bayonetta, where the game transitions to slow motion if you dodge an attack when it is about to hit you. In this case, it looks like the attack that you dodge at the perfect time has to be an unblockable one. I think the ice waves Kratos transmits in the segments from Paris Games Week is another heavy runic attack that can be equipped, and you can see him with another stone equipped later on in the new gameplay footage. It is very interesting to note that Atreus himself has a module in the heads-up display that looks exactly the same as the ones that are filled by runestones in Kratos' section. This could be a sign that Atreus will acquire a different bow later on that has a slot for a runestone, allowing him to have a special attack as well. Game Informer's cover art showed him with a flashier one that may or may not have been made by Brock and Sindri. The green bar to the right reflects how much health Kratos has, and players can recover any that's lost by stomping on green baubles. Apples are now used to extend Kratos' life bar instead of Gorgon eyes. They are named Edon apples after the goddess that they came from. She used to provide such fruit to the gods when they started to age and lose their power. In other words, it was what made them immortal, explaining why they are described as the choice food of the gods. The orange meter directly below it indicates when Spartan Rage is available. Spartan Rage is a method that players can use when overwhelmed, and it will work in a very similar way to how it did in the previous entries. It is tied to a meter that gradually fills during fights, and once it's full and activated, you will have access to a new set of moves with Kratos' fists, fulfilling that power fantasy the developers spoke of when initially designing his character. Game Informer praised this system, talking about the power they felt while blasting enemies away with Kratos' bare hands. If you watched my analysis of the E3 2016 demo, you may remember that I initially had concerns about the way Spartan Rage would work because it looked so tightly scripted, but I think it was specifically for the purposes of that demo only. That same rage meter will be used in the narrative this time as well, as a direct representation of Kratos trying to control his rage. I was also worried that they had stripped away some of Kratos' Spartan brutality now that he has a young boy with him, but then I saw this.
Ooh. Oh. Oh.
There's the brutal Kratos we all know.
Yeah, if anybody was worried that Kratos was going to be getting a little kinder in his old age.
It's satisfying to see that Kratos has kept his Spartan brutality in gameplay, but it's equally great to see the series making strides towards becoming an action RPG. Nothing highlights this more than the visit to Brock's shop. If you watched my analysis of the Lost Pages, you'll know that I believe his skin is blue because of Loki. When the menu is opened, we are greeted to 5 tabs on the left. The first 4 are for crafting, upgrading, buying and selling respectively. I am going to assume that the 5th tab is for adding and removing runestones from the head of the Leviathan axe. Peering deeper reveals that Kratos has 6 base stats. Strength increases damage for all standard attacks. Runic increases both runic attack and elemental damage. Defense reduces all damage taken. Vitality increases maximum health and decreases the severity of hit reactions from enemy attacks. Luck increases perk activation chance, increases XP and hack silver gains, and cooldown reduces the recharge time of runic attacks, runic summons, and talismans. From everything that I have seen in the gameplay so far, I don't think Sony Santa Monica are taking a conventional route for upgrading Kratos in a form where you level up every time you earn a certain amount of XP. These base stats appear to be directly influenced by armor, weapons, and talismans instead. Talismans essentially provide passive effects in the form of perks and bonuses, an example being the Luck of Ages talisman, which I believe is a pre-order bonus that grants plus 10 luck and 1 enchantment slot. You can find talismans in the world or craft them in Brock and Sindri's shop, and the icon on the far left at the bottom might be there to remind the player which talisman they have equipped. You will note that upgrading the Leviathan axe not only increases the base stat strength, which in turn raises Kratos' power level, but also opens up new skills to unlock with XP in the skill tree. The Talon bow, which belongs to Atreus, is upgradable as well, and like the Leviathan axe, upgrading it will unlock new skills for Atreus. It requires soft Svartalfheim steel instead of frozen flame though. The amount of XP and hack silver you have are indicated at the top right. God of War will allegedly have huge skill trees with lots of moves to unlock for the axe, the shield, and for Atreus and his bow. The axe's skill tree in particular has a number of permutations from close combat to ranged combat. The heavy attack Kratos charges to finish off Dragas is called the Executioner's Cleave. It can be learned by leveling up the skill tree, and it is likely to be in the section associated with close combat. Attacks that the axe performs in mid-air, like the one that passes around Kratos in a circle, can probably be acquired when the player invests enough in ranged combat. The The skills menu can be found when you press pause, so you don't have to wait until you find Brocken Sindri if there is a special move that is available but requires XP to unlock. Players won't be able to max out every skill and all base stats on their first playthrough, so anyone watching this is advised to specialise towards a certain build when you play, whether that be in strength, runic magic, defense, etc. New pieces of armor can be found or crafted via the in-game crafting system, and you can see that gear has 3 main levels. Players may therefore have the opportunity to upgrade pieces of armor that they would like to carry on wearing in later more difficult sections of the game, as opposed to being forced to wear another piece whose look they don't value as much. As we saw from different armor sets at Paris Games Week, this applies to both Kratos and Atreus. From what I can gather, there were 3 different pieces of gear in the demo that was made playable to the press. The first one reduces the Talon bow's recharge time, which is reflected in the bottom right icon of the heads-up display. It also has an ability where enemies in the air take more damage. The second item increases melee damage of the Talon bow and has the expose weakness ability, where enemies stunned by Atreus take more damage from Kratos. The final piece of gear increases Atreus' recovery speed from enemy attacks and has the ability Health Stone Assist, so that Atreus can actively pick up health stones to heal Kratos when he is low on health. Kratos himself can equip different pieces of gear on his chest, wrists and waist. Crafting and upgrading sometimes requires unique resources found in the world, like the item that Brock gives Kratos in the demo called Frozen Flame. Since the Dwarven blacksmiths play such an integral role to progression, some of you may be wondering how we could have access to their shop in different areas of Midgard or other realms. The tapir behind him is there for a reason, and I think it's for getting around to help Kratos and Atreus. The shop does seem to resemble a camp that is equipped for constantly being on the move. So with all of this talk of hack silver and XP, what are the ways that players can find or earn them? XP is earned through the normal course of playing the game and completing side quests, but the amount that you earn can be maximised by completing labours, the in-game version of challenges. Examples of labours are number 1 lighting a number of enemies on fire, and number 2 shattering them with a shield bash after freezing them with the axe a certain amount of times. Furthermore, there is an in-game bestiary in the journal that gets updated every time you meet a new enemy, and killing a certain number of each one also qualifies as a labour. Most chests that you find while scouting environments will contain hack silver. As its name suggests, hack silver were fragments of silver that were cut by Norsemen from items like jewellery and ornaments to either be used as currency or to melt down for reuse. Some chests had a puzzle attached in displaying runes that you have to find in the environment. Shattering stones inscribed with these runes would open these chests, and they are the ones connected to the Norns. We got a taste of a more significant puzzle that stood in the way of progression, and this was the circular structure in between the statues that represent the people of Alfheim. It apparently involved throwing the axe to freeze a layer while you moved the others with the wheel in front of Kratos. Clicking the touchpad will bring up the in-game map, which will help to show how all of the areas are fully connected. It further shows the completion rates for every area so you can see how much you initially missed. Once people finish the game, they can keep playing and revisit areas where 100% completion was not attained. The level and system designers said that while God of War isn't an open world game, there will still be hub areas. Exploration spaces are influenced by Bloodborne in that you can unlock alternate paths and shortcuts to these hub areas. Like Bloodborne, there will be optional bosses in this game on top of hidden quest lines. They wanted to design side content that was on the same level of quality as the main quest, providing narrative and gameplay benefits along the way. A lot of those side quests are funneled through shopkeepers Brock and Sindri. There is a side quest in particular that involves looking for a green ring that belonged to one of Brock's friends that is rewarded to the player upon completion and can affect your playstyle if equipped. On that same quest you encounter the Soul Eater for the first time, which is when we get some background on who they are, and players could miss this if they decide to skip it. They talked about having different tiers of side content to engage in, and sea-level stuff consists of precision challenges like spotting things in the distance and throwing your axe at it to get a reward. Throwing it at Odin's ravens, of which there are 33, forms part of this tier, and these ravens are probably the descendants of Hugin and Munin. A set of artifacts called the Faces of Magic form an array of collectibles that can be found while exploring Kratos' surroundings, and I believe that you can see another one floating in the background of the story trailer at one point when Kratos reveals that Atreus is part god. On the topic of exploration, we have been told that around 25% of the game's surface area has to be covered by a boat. Unlike previous games, Kratos won't be swimming whenever there is a stretch of water to get across. Some fans weren't happy about this being stripped out, but I think they faced a big challenge in programming an AI character to follow you around while underwater, and they ultimately decided to invest their resources on other things. The idea of bringing back full 3D swimming hasn't been ruled out though, so it may not be gone for good. I like the idea of a boat because it naturally implies that the environments will be more open than ever in the team's adoption of the wide linear approach. You cannot really accommodate a boat with narrow lanes or small spaces. I think it will also afford the player with greater control over the pace at which they explore, and it will open up the relationship Kratos has with Atreus. The former is pretty crucial in the context of discovering as many things as possible on your first playthrough. Corey recently tweeted that the PS4 Pro version will have a resolution mode and a performance mode. Those who want 4K can opt for the former, which is achieved through checkerboard rendering, but if you don't have a 4K TV you can choose to prioritize performance. He did not want to confirm that performance mode gives you 60 FPS, but he did say that it will be very smooth. I think it will either be like Horizon where the game moves closer to the 30 FPS lock, or Rise of the Tomb Raider where the frame rate is unlocked and the game averages around 45 to 50 FPS, hitting that sweet 60 in certain smaller areas. We won't know for sure until the game comes out and media outlets get to test it. Despite not being able to go hands-on with the game myself, I hope you guys enjoyed this video and found it insightful. Let me know if you would like to see videos on the most recent set of Lost pages, and I will see you all in the next video.